Yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Edward Michaud. I'm president of Trident Research and Recovery Incorporated, a marine salvage company that is presently involved in the salvage of a German U-boat off Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Could you tell us how you first heard about this U-boat?
Well, the initial investigation into it occurred upon interviewing a tug skipper in Boston, Massachusetts. That was the first hint we had of its existence. And that was approximately 8 years ago.
And what, was this someone that you just met?
At the time it was. Yes, it was. Mr. Warren Leggett. He was a tug skipper, as I said, and was fairly knowledgeable about at least the existence of this vessel. Was not familiar with any of the circumstances surrounding its sinking, but was familiar with the existence, and after priming him quite often, it led to other sources of information.
What is it that's so interesting or unique about this particular wreck?
I would have to say that the most fascinating aspect of this vessel was the fact that it's not supposed to exist. All contemporary accounts and official histories state that the vessel was never even built, yet we obviously have it in our backyard.
If it wasn't supposed to exist, how did you find out anything more about it?
The process of discovery began by actually discovering that the vessel was not of the type we expected it to be. It was much larger than any known German U-boat type known to exist during the war.
What ideas have you managed to pull together about what it was doing there?
Well, it's a combination of facts and theories. Essentially, the bottom line is what we've come up with is that the vessel was here to negotiate an armistice on behalf of German industrialists. That's it in a nutshell, with complicity of U.S. State Department personnel as well as some intelligence personnel.
So can you take us through the chronology of events around about the time, from when the U-boat maybe set off from Germany?
Our records indicate the vessel departed Germany on or about July 20th of 1944. The record is pretty indicative of the 20th of July, the same day as the attempted assassination coup against Adolf Hitler, as it turns out. This makes sense, of course, because the people involved, as we found out, with this vessel were most probably also involved in the Nazi opposition in Germany in 1944.
So would it be fair to say that these were the good guys in Germany?
It's hard to say whether they're good or bad guys. These were the same people who put Hitler in power in the first place. So it's a matter of opinion, I suppose. I suppose as a description, a general description, you could say they were the German good guys if you consider there were such people. But yes, you could say they were the German good guys.
Well, I don't think necessarily they were.
No.
But so what are your ideas around that assassination attempt? What was going on in Germany at the time?
Well, as many people know, there were many assassination attempts on Hitler. The most effective, of course, was the last recorded attempt on the 20th of July, when a bomb was placed inside his briefing room at the Wolfschanze complex in Poland. And that turned out to be a failure, of course. But essentially, the people involved in this vessel and some of the industrialists and military personnel, which obviously assisted it to some degree, had also arranged previous attempts on Hitler's life. It was typically a gangster state in Germany. One must consider this. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they were trying to do good for the nation, but rather do good for themselves. Hitler was in the process of destroying his country and its industry.
So what was their motive?
Their motive was personal survival, corporate and personal survival. That's the bottom line.
So once this U-boat set off over here, what was the pattern of events across the Atlantic and when it arrived?
Again, in a nutshell, proceeding across the Atlantic from the 20th of July, we have strong indication that she proceeded out of the Baltic Sea from Gdynia, Poland, departing from Gdynia, proceeded past to the north of the British Isles, and then south between Iceland and the Irish coast, and then down into the North Atlantic, and thence to the Central Atlantic towards the U.S. eastern seaboard.
Okay, and what happened when it arrived?
Very interesting. When she arrived, obviously she was spotted way before she arrived on the coast. She was spotted several times by U.S. Spotter planes and British spotter planes. In fact, both U.S. and British Ultra were communicating with each other, asking each other if they knew anything about this vessel.
Who's Ultra?
Ultra was the top secret code and cipher school in Great Britain, and in the United States it was Naval Intelligence specifically. U.S. Army also had their version of Ultra. Ultra was code decrypt, essentially. And at the time it was the most classified secret of the war.
Okay, so when it arrived?
When did it arrive?
No, well, what happened when it arrived? What was the dates and what happened?
Well, she arrived approximately on the 24th of August, 1944, from what we can tell by the records. She was proceeding close to the coast. Obviously, the record indicates she was trying to find a good area for sending a transmission, and possibly for a rendezvous point as well. Some of the records indicate that there was a point jig in the records referred to by Allied intelligence, as well as some ultra decrypts. We're not too sure what that might mean, but it might refer to the point of rendezvous that this vessel was proceeding to. And this just happens to be 14 miles southeast of Chatham, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in very shallow water, needless to say. And when she arrived on the 25th of August, she surfaced approximately just before sunset. And she was in the process of sending out a transmission, as we found out later from a Naval Intelligence veteran, a highly classified top secret Enigma transmission in diplomatic code, what they call a B-bar, high priority. And she was in an S5 location, O&I parlance for meaning very close to the station. The station that intercepted her transmission was a U.S. Naval radio intercept station in Chatham, Massachusetts. And so it didn't take them long to get a fix on the vessel. As it turns out, there were no vessels or airships or planes deployed to intercept her that we know of. Certainly there are no records indicating that nobody is deployed directly to her to intercept her, which we thought very strange. But we did find out that the naval airship K-25 did proceed to the area. And there are very strong indications, according to the official records, the existing records, that she was attacked and indeed sunk by a naval airship shortly after submitting her transmission.
So what I find difficult to understand is if there were communications going on with the top level in Washington between this U-boat and them, how come the boat was sunk? Do you think it was under orders from Washington?
Good question, and a good point to raise. No, it's obvious by all accounts the vessel was not purposely sunk by any U.S. naval command, or any U.S. command for that matter. She was sunk obviously by accident. The bottom line again is that she was sunk by a naval airship that was simply out doing its job and had no idea what the vessel was up to, but only knew that it was an enemy vessel in Allied territory that needed to be attacked. And
so what evidence do you have for that, though?
What we do have are the Eastern Sea Frontier reports detailing the airship's traverse to that area and her activity in that area. We also have a naval intelligence decrypt of a last transmission sent by the U-boat in plain transmission, plain text, no coding, obviously sent in the last hasty seconds of the vessel's existence, saying, quote, "am being attacked by aircraft," unquote. And that was on 25 August in a place known as a local transmission.
But what was going on or what evidence do you have that the blimp, the naval blimp that was attacking the boat, was not following orders from Washington or from a higher level?
Well, there is a lack of documentation giving commands to the airship specifying an attack. There are commands to her asking her to proceed to the area of the vessel's location and search, but there are no records indicating an attack. But there are some very curious movements at the time the airship arrives on the scene, and shortly thereafter when a Red Able patrol is conducted by two surface craft, two Coast Guard boats and a sub-chaser. And they make some very strange maneuvers in the area as if they're looking for flotsam and jetsam from a sunk vessel, which is the obvious indication. And their logs tend to agree with this as well.
Right, now, how about the pilot of the, or the person that did the sinking?
Well, the person that claims the sinking, he seems to be off on a few details, but he's amazingly accurate on many others. And many people discount his statements, whereas we look at what he says and compare it with the official record and what we have found on site. And amazingly, what he says seems to match up with what we find.
So what's he been saying?
For example, his account was that he dropped 2 depth charges over the submarine as it was trying to submerge to lower its silhouette as a target. And while it was happening, he dropped 2 depth charges. One detonated, the other one was a dud. The one that detonated is number 350 Torpex depth charge. Detonated when it reached approximately 10 feet, directly over the what we now know as the U-boat's galley. And when he said he saw the detonation of the charge, when it went off, he said it was right behind the conning tower. And sure enough, the hole we found in the wreck, the detonation hole, the damage hole, was right behind the conning tower. And what he said he saw floating to the surface was what he believed to be heads of lettuce. Well, this made sense, because we know the damaged area was the galley. We know that from site surveys. So it seemed to match up pretty closely. And what he had to relate, the airship pilot had to relate when he returned, showed an immediate naval cover-up. Certainly the indications we've been getting, because he was immediately transferred the next day to Recife, Brazil.
Sorry, to where?
To Recife, Brazil, Naval Air Station. So he was removed from the scene as quickly as possible, along with the rest of the crew who were transferred to other bases throughout the country.
Is there any other evidence that him sinking this boat wasn't viewed too happily by some of his seniors?
Very much so. He was asked repeatedly by his naval intelligence interrogator whether he actually wanted to file a report mentioning the attack. And his words, quote unquote, was, "Yes, damn it, I sank a sub and I want credit for it." And the naval intelligence personnel reply was that, okay. And he marched him into the next room. This is upon his return, of course, a few hours later. And when he got into the next room, he asked him again all the questions that are in the war report. And he says, okay, you're dismissed. And the next, Joe thought it was all over, you know, the pilot that sank this. And the next thing he knew, he was transferred the next day. That's all he knew about it. We found it very strange, because the pilot had mentioned that the film showing the attack, the stern gun camera on the blimp obviously caught the detonation of the charge on the sub, but it disappeared. And according to the pilot, he had heard it was flown to Washington, D.C. the next day and just disappeared in the files. It cannot be found even today. So,
right, who is this? Who is this person? What's the guy?
We'll just say Joe for now, right. But we don't want to use his last name right now.
Okay, but you've managed to track him down?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Off the record, I'll tell you all about it.
Okay.
But right. Certainly on the record, I just want to keep his last name out for now.
Right, okay. So, have you any idea who was actually on this boat?
Actually, we don't. We can only surmise. We do know that there are a lot of paper trails leading up to the deployment of this vessel, and there are extremely strong indications that there could very well have been representatives of German industry. And that is the best scenario, everything that fits at this point. Certainly whoever was on board, we firmly believe represented German industry as a whole.
And do you think that they expected for the Americans to show them? I mean, remembering, of course, that 1944 is at the height of war.
Yes.
They were heading off to the United States. What makes you think or what would have made them think maybe that they would get a good reception?
Well, it's a long and complex story behind that. But essentially the whole story behind a German attempted armistice, as well as a safe haven, if you will, commenced in November of 1943. We know this from the existing record, in which Martin Bormann specifically commenced what they call Akten Fürland, which means action land of fire, referring to the southern geographical area of Argentina. Specifically, that operation dealt with German U-boats proceeding to South America. One, to hide potential Nazi war criminals, and two, to hide securities accumulated by the Nazi Reich throughout the years. Now, as we go into 1944, there are numerous attempts by these same people, as well as by additional anti-Nazi hardliners who wish to end the war for their own benefits and for what they think is best for their country, but mostly for themselves and corporate interests, corporate securities for post-war interests. And what happened was there were many contacts between, such as the Dulles brothers, U.S. intelligence in Switzerland, and German emissaries, and this is well documented. There are also many contacts with Franz von Papen, the German ambassador in Turkey, between himself and U.S. intelligence personnel both in Switzerland and in Lisbon, Portugal.
So is it possible that the Americans were expecting this boat, or do you think, I mean, is that possible or not?
I would say most definitely somebody in the United States expected the arrival of this vessel. There is no doubt about that. And every indication is that it could very well have been the State Department. For one thing, we do know that the transmission she was sending was earmarked for the White House map room. We know that from an interview from a naval intelligence veteran, Preston Howley, who was stationed in Chatham and intercepted the transmission. And it was bound to the White House map room, which we know is controlled by the State Department, or was at that time.
What sort of place would the White House map room have been? What kind of operations go on there?
White House map room was not a map room, really. It was a combined intelligence service. Army, Navy, Army Air Force, FBI, OSS, what have you, naval intelligence. And it was staffed by many uniforms at that time, but it was all run by the State Department. And it was equipped very heavily with decoding equipment. And it just happened to be equipped with a Geheimschreiber, a German coding machine, diplomatic coding machine, that we know was supplied to them by the German resistance in November of 1943. So we found that very interesting. And it was the only Geheimschreiber that was in the United States at that time.
So this would have been used to decrypt the message from the U-boat, possibly?
It was the only other coding machine that could understand the coding from this U-boat.
Okay, getting back to the last few years and your discovery of this. What sort of stage is the wreck at now? What sort of stage is the salvage operation at?
Right now we proceeded very cautiously through strict archaeological guidelines. We know that it is, for all intents and purposes, a war grave. So we have to proceed very cautiously. We also have to proceed very cautiously in our contents. Now, we don't know exactly what is inside the vessel. We do know there's some airtight sections in this vessel. But we do know that paperwork holds up well inside the hulls of submarines. And since there are airtight sections, there could very well be some very interesting revelations in the form of documentation. And if these people in this U-boat are bound here for an armistice, combined with possibly providing safe haven for securities, there's going to be indications of it inside the boat. No doubt about that.
And what state is the wreck in itself?
I would have to say overall it's in excellent condition, considering it is very heavily buried in sand. The conning tower was very heavily armored, so it held up rather well. It's got an awful lot of fishing net in it, and the site conditions are horrendous. The currents average between 2 and 4 knots at any time during diving operations. So essentially it's like a flag on a flagpole for the diver. It's very difficult. And visibility averages anywhere from 6 inches to 2 feet, which is very limited. It's much less than a meter.
Has there been interest from, for example, from the Navy or the government about your discovery? I would have thought that the Navy would be particularly interested.
Yes, well, you're correct. The Navy had much more interest than even we expected. We do know that the initial stages of our federal action, we filed federally for the rights on this vessel. And as soon as we did that, there was heavy opposition voiced by the Department of State through the Department of Justice. These are typical government organs at work. We knew we were onto something sensitive when we started receiving this information. What surprised us most was just in 1997, September of 97, We have a restraining order on the site, a federally issued restraining order, which even the military has to honor. What happened was, in the end of September, September 30th specifically of 1997, the U.S. Navy attempted to violate that restraining order, proceed to the site on their own with subcontracted vessels, civilian boats contracted by the Navy, and put divers down the boat, obviously in an attempt to remove sensitive items.
Now, I would have thought that was a relatively easy thing to do while you're on the shore for them to dive on.
Well, we noticed them within hours. Certainly we caught them before they were able to deploy their divers. One, they had to locate it exactly. They had to locate the vessel exactly, which we had not given them the exact latitude, longitude of the wreck, so it took them time to do that. And also, a lot of the civilian crew on the contracted vessels were bragging about going to the U-boat site on Nantucket. So our people, some of which are on Nantucket Island, had heard about this. And so it didn't take us long to mobilize and get into action. And we called everyone from the State Department to the U.S. Navy and voiced our complaints politely but firmly, and also called the federal court, who were ready to take action at a moment's notice against any government agency violating this order. So we did stop the attempt, but it was a close call.
So how did you actually get through to the boats on the surface that their presence wasn't really wanted there?
Well, I'm sure what happened, probably the biggest influence in that was the media. The next day after this started, we had a press coverage, a small press article, which I've given you a copy of. And it didn't take the Navy long to catch on to that and realize the media was onto them. And these people don't operate well outside shadows. Once you shed a light on them, they disappear. And that's exactly what happened. We didn't have to initiate the federal action, thank God. We didn't have to get the federal marshal up into it, because they got the message loud and clear. Not to mention me calling every admiral in the Pentagon I could think of, and talking to the actual site commanders in Chatham, the land-based commander, and convincing him that it was a federally filed site and that it would not be in his best interest to proceed. So it worked out well, as it turned out, but for a while we were scared.
What about the Coast Guard?
The Coast Guard were very helpful. They don't get involved as a policy with Navy operations, but they helped us in any way they could, and they did some favors for us.
Just give us an idea of the kind of what you might find when you finally do get down into the wreck and open it up. What kind of things are you what sort of things are you expecting?
Oh, I hate to speculate. Documentation, I know. I know we will find documentation. What kind of documentation is anybody's guess. My personal best guess would be documentation reflecting an armistice deal, perhaps. Also, there could be a reference to securities, securities transfers, security placements, what have you. For all I know, there could be Swiss bank account numbers. I just don't know. And it could be actual securities. There's no way of knowing this. But we do know that there will be records referring to the negotiations then ongoing between the Nazi industrialists, anti-Nazis if you will, and U.S. intelligence.
But this is a U-boat. It's not designed to carry silver or gold or whatever the Nazis might have been trying to get from Argentina.
Well, this is a warship, but it was a warship that could carry 600 deadweight tons of cargo without affecting her trim. So she was more than capable of performing a dual role.
There's not many warships that were, or not many, certainly submarines, that would be able to carry cargo, surely?
No. No, this was a special boat. She's 115 meters in length. She's, in feet, she's 32 feet wide. So, and she's 40 feet from the conning tower to keel. That's a very big submarine. In fact, it's larger than our present-day Los Angeles class attack submarines. Yes, so she is very capable. She's armed with twin armored turrets, each carrying a twin-barrel 127 millimeter gun. So she had a lot of firepower as well as a lot of cargo capacity. To increase her cargo capacity, they could have removed a lot of her shells and powder from her armories. So, and each one of those armories can carry at least 200 tons individually. So.
Okay, can you take us through the events? Okay, so it's been the blimp has depth charged the boat. What does it look like happened? So and the boat then dived and set the depth charge off. Can you just take us through that kind of process?
Yes. What we've got so far in preliminary assessments on looking at the wreck site and looking at the surrounding shoal, it's obvious she was commencing a dive at the time she received an attack and the one depth charge going off. At that point, equilibrium was thrown off, and she commenced flooding. She's still proceeding on a headway. In other words, she's still going forward. At the time she's doing this, she's kicking over to one side or the other, port or starboard. Now, the mounts that are on her main deck level are gravity mounted. They're so heavy. They're gravity mounted. They probably weigh at least 12 tons apiece. And what happened, obviously, was one of those turrets actually fell off when she took an extreme list. Probably to starboard, that would be our best guess. And as a result, that armored mount settled upside down in the sand some ways away from the final resting place of the wreck, say approximately 100 meters. We've located that armored mount, and it's full of sand upside down at the bottom, and it's quite a sight. And she proceeded, say another 100 meters, eventually coming to rest against a sand shoal in very shallow water, approximately 60 feet. But she sanded up very quickly. And that is why she was very hard to detect even today, because she constantly covers and uncovers with sand by as much as 10 or 20 feet sometimes. So even though she's a big boat, it's a big ocean and it's a lot of sand. So, but in most cases she's almost always exposed from the main deck up.
Okay. Going back to the possible securities on board, is it most likely to have been gold, do you think, if there was?
I hate
Obviously, we still don't know.
Well, I really hate to speculate on anything to do with securities. Anything is possible.
Yeah. So you're saying that it's possible that the boat was making a stop off at Cape Cod and then was heading down to Argentina with the securities, possibly?
That is the indication given.
Were there other similar U-boat missions earlier during the war then?
Most definitely. We've confirmed at least 3 U-boat missions to South America, carrying securities under what the Allies call safe haven and what the Germans call Acton Furland. We don't know which U-boats, but we do know they arrived, and we have Argentine intelligence documents confirming that they were spotted unloading actual securities. And there are records existing of the securities deposit in the Banco Alaman Transatlantico and the Banco Tornquist in downtown Buenos Aires, facilitated by the Sullivan Cromwell offices, which is a law firm that just happens to be Alan Dulles' law firm. So
what happened to this money? Any idea?
Oh, it disappeared. Even today's recent inquiries on the Holocaust Assets Inquiry conducted by the State Department failed to address entirely the Argentine involvement of these securities. We find that very interesting. We have very strong indication. In fact, there is actually proof that a lot of these securities actually were transferred later to New York City at the Federal Reserve in New York. And when that happened, that was in 1950. They were subsequently resmelted in the U.S. assay bars from Nazi gold bars. The U.S. Federal Reserve did this now. That's documented. And they were sent on to Germany in 1950. There's your great German rebuilding program right there. Nazi money used to rebuild Germany with U.S. complicity.
So you think that there was some kind of relationship then between people like the Dulles brothers and some German industrialists?
Most definitely. There is no doubt about that. All of the history about the Dulles brothers, both Alan and John Foster, and their relationships with all the German industrialists that we've researched are very positive, very firm. They represented them in numerous lawsuits before and after the war. No doubt about it. Even the head of the Bank for International Settlements, Thomas McKittrick, was Alan Dulles' personal client in 1946. And BIS, as everyone knows, was very guilty of laundering Nazi money before, during, and after the war.
McKittrick landed in the top position
Sorry,
of Chase
I
National
have to
Bank.
ask you to be quiet. I'm sorry. Okay, so what's the situation now? Are you going to be, or what's the next step for you with this boat, with the U-boat? What's going to be happening next?
The next step is going to be interesting. As I said, we're proceeding cautiously. But once we penetrate this vessel, it'll go very quickly. We have to do it properly. We have an archaeologist for that too. We fully plan to address all of the concerns of all governments and historians. Our objective is to preserve everything recovered, no matter what it may be, and use it for public dissemination. They're going to know that the world is going to know what's in this boat. It's as simple as that. And we're going to do our best to make it happen.
Okay, that'll do fine. Thanks very much, Ed.
We were being recorded, Mum.
I didn't know.
I know you didn't.
Sorry, I should have told you. Oh, what are you doing, you stupid machine?
Did it record?
Well, I hope so.